A glint of paranoia shone in Tarakon's cinnamon eyes as he relinquished with a sigh. He stood before the priest, who commanded, "Show me your dragon's breath, your pyromania." Tarakon opened his hand and closed his eyes. Concentration burned inside him. He caressed the scalding pain with his imagination and let the heat catch down his fingers into his hand. His palm blushed. He wanted to pull away from the heat, but steadied his hand. The air chattered and crisped, igniting spontaneously and seemingly without fuel. He could feel the pulsing heat lap his fingers and face. He opened his eyes to the tongue of fire dancing but a moment out of his reach. Good. Now what? Answer me this. Why did you choose to hold the flame? Nesu was the greatest warlock in the kingdom, so his patronage erased the confidence from Tarakon's answer, leaving only the awkward, self-conscious drone of insecurity. Well, you see, it's just that I have never been able to, He was not educated in the craft, and tried to fix his words. Lose contact? He stuttered, testing to see if perhaps these terms would work. With my fire, I can make tongues and strings. I cannot make fireballs or project it in any way like that. This is not about disassociation, Tarakon. This is about foci and concentration. When I asked you to create a flame for me, you immediately opened your hand. Why did you open your hand? I don't know, Tarakon replied. I've always done it that way. Even gods change, Nesu quipped one of his old standards. Here. Nesu drifted behind Tarakon, hovering at an odd distance, near enough that Tarakon could feel the pressure shift as the vizier leaned in, but never close enough that the silk robes would brush against his bare back. Nesu rolled up his midnight sleeve, bunching it around his shoulder. The muscles of his naked arm quivered with delicate precision as he reached around Tarakon, careful not to brush against him. Nesu's soft, unused fingers traced the coarse stubble on the planes of Tarakon's cheek, along the curve of his jaw and between the tendons of his neck. The titillating caress retreated, but the echo remained swirling along his face. Now, concentrate the fever on the remnant sensation, Nesu commanded. Tarakon closed his eyes again, concentrating the heat in his imagination toward the haunting tickle. Now simply let the fires burn, just as it had in your palm. A bittersweet aroma played in his flared nostrils, and his eyes stung as they opened into a fog of gray ash. What in the demon's desert? Tarakon pressed his rough hands against his flushed cheeks. The scratchy shadow of pubescent follicles and the grate of his fingers across his cheeks had been erased. His brow arched with astonishment. The beard was burned off. I never thought of that. Imagination applied is a waste. I am astonished that you never learned it, though. Granted, most boys adept at fire have a patriarch whom they can shadow. Did you never notice your peers not wasting time on human tools for grooming? Nesu chuckled. I hope you do not think my acolytes and I waste time with a razor. By black magic, I would never have time to get through my duties. I groom with the infantry, Tarakon reflected, and humans were not permitted titles over sergeant. I guess it never occurred to me. Tarakon kept tracing his face, fearful that the hairs might instantly reappear. Nesu turned Tarakon to face him. Remember, my boy, the hand is just a tool for concentration. It is neither a source nor a restriction on the manipulation granted to our kind by the Tawesh. Do not let yourself be human when you are so much more. There was a loud clatter, and it drew their attention. The javelins were pouring out from the quiver, which had been violently thrown to the ground at the hooves of Shem's preferred unicorn. The stacked ponytails of the blond soldier bobbed as he stomped away. Well, Tarakon looked remorseful. Thank you. Come sit with me, he offered Tarakon the open stool, formerly occupied by Draco. Tarakon hovered momentarily, ashamed that his choice to stay in the vizier's company might insult the prince's memory. I have often wondered where you will end up. Do not be too flattered, as I do this with everyone in my acquaintance. Only a moment before I noticed you there, I was imagining what would have happened if Simon had succeeded me as Hierophant. It really is more a matter of sentiment, as though I could reconcile his potential, lost forever into that accursed desert. But at some point, I imagine all of my pupils succeeding me. I welcome the distraction of comparing their possible influences on the nation, and though I mourn some changes that might be made, I feel even more remorse when I am unable to communicate all of the goals I have for them. It tears me apart to know that, even with all of my abilities, I will never be able to tell Simon about what I wanted to see him fulfill. It was an honor to have him serve, not only as one of my acolytes, but to know that he wielded his sword so nobly for the House of Hexen. It is such a terrible loss, but I have grown disenchanted with lingering and mourning. So instead I turn to see you here before me, a lone knight who has made himself a hero, who dares to be prince consort, and whom I still know so little about. Judging from your demeanor towards the others, I presume that you have found some comfortable niche in your position? Actually, I'm still hoping to make general, Terracon said, feeling more naked than could be rationalized by simply being without his tunic. General? That is no easy title to achieve. There are no openings now, and there are many majors vying for those that will open. Has a general offered to take you as squire? Draco jested once about it, but of course I'm not eligible for the Order of Valish. Or at least I was not. Now with the betrothal, I'm unsure what opportunities I have. Either way, the Order is without a general at the moment. Nasu ticked his finger contemplatively against his lip. You do not seem impressed by Her Majesty's direction for the nation. What exactly are your intentions with Princess Cassandra? That is something you'll have to ask her. Nasu eyed Terracon suspiciously, contemplating the captain's response. Finally, he let out a devilish laugh, entirely out of character for the Hierophant. The shouted orders penetrated his darkness, and he followed them out from behind slumbering eyes and into the glaring light of a mid-morning sun. The hour struck him as terribly late, and he quickly crawled out from beneath his tent. He secured the frogs on his double-breasted tunic as he approached Eloise, who was already fully armored and barking violently toward the lieutenants and Shem. Did I sleep in? No. Nasu woke me only a moment ago. Get packing. We're moving out soon. Terracon turned back toward his tent, but was stayed when, out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of a wagon slowly being towed down a trail. 2 knights escorted the vehicle, their lances flying black banners with the crescent charge. Who? Terracon's thoughts slipped out. The churning wheels grew louder as they rolled down the sloping hill into the shallow valley. Strands of dried hay floated down from the wagon's bed, littering the trail. The chocolate ringlets foaming beneath the barbute and the tight fit of the other's armor identified the escorts as Karen and Darrell. The vehicle's pilot, however, remained lost in a shadow-stained cloak. Features grew more distinct as the cart pulled into camp. The pilot was curiously short, and the stunted legs, which were not long enough to slide out from under the robe's hem, much less reach the footboard, swayed with the rambling cart. The excessively long sleeves curled around the reins, hiding the hands that steered the unicorns. Shadows swam within the hood, leaving only the tip of some green beak to peek out from beneath. The tenebrous cowl turned to face Terracon, and a pair of lights glinted below the green beak, instilling the captain with paranoid self-concern. Suddenly guilt-stricken for his own voyeuristic curiosity, he averted his gaze and moved to disassemble his tent. Though it was a simple procedure, he was hopelessly distracted by his curiosity, and his eyes kept stealing glances of the robed shadow. It drove the wagon into the center of their camp. Nasu gracefully approached the figure. Terracon failed to catch their distant exchange over the commotion in disassembling the campsite. Nasu turned from the cart and drew the soldier's attention with his opened arms. Spare your mounts and load your equipment on the wagon's bed. Keep only the necessities on your person. I will also take this moment to caution all of you. If Cassandra learns that Draco spent his life trying to rescue her, she will grow despondent. The mention of his name stung the squad, and their attentive eyes fell remorsefully. Nasu continued. This mission is not complete until the princess is safely returned home. Until then, she must suffer no more despair than what she has already endured. Her constitution may be too fragile to sustain such a loss, and we can take no risks in returning her. She cannot know about Simon or Draco. She cannot know that anyone has been lost. Tarakan met the order with relief. He did not have the strength to confront the loss himself, and the less it was mentioned, the better. There was a general compliance. Their mourning could only be addressed with slow thoughts and time. Nasu's request met only one foul glare. "He is dead, and you want me to forget?" Karen snapped. She had dismounted and stood beside her unicorn on the outskirts of the gathering, but her quarrel had brought her to the front of everyone's attention. "I will not cower from my pain, Nasu." Karen's tone was heretical. There was no acknowledgement of Nasu's place, no recognition of his authority. Nasu was the queen's voice, and Karen dared to deride his command. The concern Eloise had voiced earlier about the chain of command reared back into Tarakan's mind as he watched Karen's hurt tear at the standards expected of Her Majesty's military. Nasu could only feign oblivious ignorance to Karen's outburst. His eyes fell from her just as his tone rebuked her comments. "The princess will not know about Draco until she is home." No one spoke out while their moral arguments wrestled within. Eloise finally broke the silence. "You heard him. Now get those tents stowed." The posts had been pulled and rolled into the drape. The bundle was tied with cord, and Tarakan abandoned it and Ramses' caparison on the wagon. He tightened the saddle cinch and then attended to suiting his armor. Patiences were tested as everyone hurried. Eventually they saddled and strolled from the encampment upon their unicorns. Their traverse of the sward rang with the clatter of hooves hammering against rust-colored stone slabs, and with the squealing grind of the wagon's wheels. So when the first hoof dropped silently into loamy prairie, there was a communal sigh of relief. The sporadic stalks of grain grew denser as they traveled, and rich green hues flushed from the roots into the tall stalks. Soft breezes, rolling down the distant northern slopes, sailed through the grass and caused it to ripple and wave. Towers of purple and white flowers crawled over the sea of grain, reaching toward the cloud-spotted sky. Crooked trees, heavy with green leaves, curled over the wheel-cut trail. Aged and withered boards suspended between posts lined the path and divided the open land from the farmer's well-tended acres. Windmills whirled their wide blades over their not yet harvested yield. These yards sustained the Duchy of Caldara, the designated ward of the Duchess Myre. Tarakan slowed Ramses and fell to the back of the squad as it sailed through the grass. He pulled the unicorn beside Daryl, whose bloodshot gaze fell forward limply. "Where were you off to this morning?" Tarakan asked. "Caldara," he moaned groggily. Nasu was up with the sun and ran Major Karen and I out of bed. He handed us a list and a letter and hurried us west up a mountain trail to Caldara. The Major was there before, so I let her lead the way. It gave me a chance to steal some sleep on the ride. Anyway, the Duchess Myre is still out. Her ship is not due to arrive for quite some time, so the constable dealt with us. We loaded up and headed back. "And what about the driver?" "Oh, him? When we picked up the cart, he was there. Pretty curious, huh? The constable has offered his services as a gift. He is a guide of some sort, said to be very familiar with the northern peninsula, especially the forests of the northern range." "Why the cloak? Who is he?" I could not say. He's been wrapped up like that since we saw him. The constable only said his name once. Papa Nick, I believe? He did not seem to like that, though. It was hard to tell exactly what he was saying. He has a rather strong dialect. In any case, he mumbled non-stop for almost the first hour of our trip back. I'm pretty sure that he calls himself Nickon, but I would not take a bet. "He looked at me earlier," Tarakan said. "You saw his eyes?" "No. He did turn toward me, though." The charcoal fabric folded taut as the hood began to peek around the shoulder, turning to face them directly. They both held their breath, their expressions washed of everything except fear. The fabric loosened as the darkened face turned away. "Wow, he is watching you, Captain," the sergeant whispered, as though the words were accidentally stained on his breath. Tarakon's heart clenched tighter. A froth of vegetation poured down the gorges of the northern range before spilling across the valley, seeping into the fields. Where once the farmers' fences penned the fields from the road, now the fences penned the forest from the fields. They passed into the tree line. The branches stretched over their heads, crossing and braiding until they were knit into a dense canopy. The foliage mopped up much of the sunlight, leaving only thin strands to trickle through and scroll marbleized shadows across the root-strewn floor. Discarded and outgrown twigs snapped under the hooves and wheels with brutal cracks. Weaving through the tree-lined aisles slowed their pace. The forest developed into a maddening labyrinth as attempts to navigate the wagon between the narrowing trees proved futile. The angle of the thin strands of golden light leaking through the canopy began to bend, ever more acute, casting the marbleized shadows against the trunks. The light lost its contrast as the setting sun sipped her rays back between the leaves. The dappled shadows grew longer, then darker, and soon swallowed the forest. The herd huddled close together so as not to lose sight of one another. Their eyes proved blind the deeper they traveled into the wild. The walls of the trees kept creeping toward them, cutting into their speed. The hooves cracked progressively fewer downed branches. The recycled tune of squealing wheels slowed, stretching the duration of the notes and scratching the idiosyncrasies of the melody into everyone's memory. They stopped. Tarakon looked up through the shadows to see Nesu in the lead, perusing the forest with unblinking eyes. They widened. Nesu kicked the dapple-gray unicorn, and it trotted over to a tall tree, superficially indistinguishable in every way from the rest of the forest. The silk sleeve slipped to his shoulder as he reached for the branch. It moaned with dissent as it was pulled lower. A large serrated knife, brandished from a sheath hanging off the saddle, bit into the branch. The bowed limb bobbed back, abandoning the severed remnant in Nesu's hand. The blade peeled off the callous bark. The iron was wet with sap, and Nesu sipped at the bitter syrup before stashing the weapon in its leather case. He licked his own fingers clean of the sticky residue and then reached into the recesses of his dark cloak. He pulled out a cylindrical reliquary, nipped it open, and poured a barkless twig into his open hand. The grain, color, and aroma of the samples matched. "This is it," he shouted. "Find a place and make camp."